The lights of Manhattan shimmered like a crown of jewels scattered across the night. It was Friday, the kind of night when power disguised itself as elegance, and wealth pretended to be taste. Inside Le Jardin Bleu, one of the Upper East Side's most exclusive restaurants, the air buzzed with polite laughter and the clinking of crystal glasses. Every sound was rehearsed, every gesture a performance. The chandeliers above glowed softly, casting golden halos over white tablecloths and polished cutlery. Conversations danced between deals and secrets, and every smile hid a strategy. Le Jardin Bleu was not a place for ordinary hunger. It was where the powerful came to feed their egos. Among the staff gliding across the floor, waiters, sommeliers, hostesses, one figure moved with quiet precision. Camila Rivera, 27, wore her black uniform with a poise that didn't belong to someone earning by the hour. Her dark hair was tied neatly, her skin warm against the cool gleam of silver trays. Her brown eyes, sharp, thoughtful, unflinching, took in everything, though she said very little. To the guests, she was just another waitress. To the staff, she was polite but distant, the kind of woman who did her work flawlessly and went home without small talk. No one knew much about her except that she had started 3 months ago with an impeccable recommendation and the air of someone who'd once belonged somewhere else. That night, the restaurant's crown jewel was Table 7, reserved for Thomas Grayson, the 40-year-old CEO of Grayson Technologies. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore power like a custom suit. Beside him sat Mark Fielding, his investment partner, and Lauren Hale, his fiancée, a model-turned-influencer whose life sparkled across social media feeds but felt increasingly hollow in real time. "Table 7, whispered the floor manager to Camila as she prepared the wine. "Don't mess this up. That man tips more than most people make in a week, if he's in a good mood." Camila gave a small nod. She didn't need the warning. She'd seen Grayson before, his arrogance, his casual cruelty. He was the kind of man who mistook wealth for wisdom and disrespect for charm. As she approached with a bottle of Chateau Margaux, the conversation at the table was already dripping with self-satisfaction. "This launch will be legendary," Mark was saying. "After tomorrow, half the East Coast's logistics will be ours." Thomas smirked. "Not half. All of it. We don't share thrones." Lauren rolled her eyes, smiling politely. She'd heard this tone too many times. Ambition seasoned with ego. Then Thomas noticed Camila. "Ah, here comes the star of the evening," he said in a mock grand tone. "Careful with that bottle, sweetheart. It costs more than your car." Camila met his gaze briefly, her expression unreadable. "Yes, sir." Her voice was soft, calm, with an accent faint enough to intrigue but not distract. She poured the wine smoothly, her hand steady as a metronome. Lauren chuckled awkwardly. "Thomas, really?" He shrugged, amused by his own wit. "What? It's a joke. I'm sure she's used to it." Camila didn't react. She finished pouring, placed the bottle gently in its cradle and stepped back. To most people, her silence might have seemed submissive, but those who really watched her, her precise movements, the composure in her eyes, would sense something different. A quiet strength, a patience that had purpose. Thomas leaned toward Mark. "See? Not a word. They hire anyone these days. Doesn't even know what she's serving." He switched languages, his Spanish clumsy but loud enough to draw snickers from his companions. "¿Verdad, señorita? Solo sabe sonreír y servir vino, ¿no?" "You probably don't even understand me." Lauren frowned. "Thomas, stop." He waved her off, smirking. "Relax, darling. It's harmless fun." Camila said nothing, but her lips pressed together just slightly, the only sign that the words had found their mark. Inside her chest, something tightened, but she steadied herself. She had come here for a reason, and it wasn't to prove herself to men like Thomas Grayson. When she had first applied for the job, she had handed over a modest resume, the kind that didn't stand out. A degree in languages, some restaurant experience, references that couldn't be traced. What no one at Le Jardin Bleu knew was that the name Camila Rivera had once appeared in the Wall Street Journal. Not in the society pages, but in the obituaries section. Her father, Alejandro Rivera, had been one of the most respected philanthropists in Latin America, founder of the Rivera Foundation, a billion-dollar trust dedicated to education and social justice. When he died suddenly a year ago, the foundation's future fell to his only daughter. But before signing the inheritance documents, Camila had made a decision that stunned her father's lawyers. She disappeared. No press, no interviews, no signature. She wanted to see the world her father had tried to change. From below. Working at Le Jardin Bleu was her experiment. A test. She wanted to understand how the civilized elite, the kind her father once dined with, treated those they called help. And tonight she was seeing the answer in real time. Thomas Grayson laughed again, now in English. See, Mark? That's the difference between people like us and, well, everyone else. Some serve. Some are served. Mark chuckled. Evolution, right? Camila placed their bread basket on the table, her hands steady though her stomach burned. Anything else for you, gentlemen? She asked politely. Thomas smirked. Yeah, a smile wouldn't hurt. She gave him one, calm, professional and colder than marble. As she turned away, she caught her reflection in a glass wall. A young woman standing among chandeliers and laughter, invisible yet essential. She'd read once that power reveals itself not in who speaks the loudest, but in who doesn't need to. Tonight, she believed that more than ever. Behind her, Thomas was still talking, bragging about profits, about expansion, about being on the cover of Forbes. Every sentence sounded like a verdict against empathy. Did you know, he said loudly to Lauren, that I started with nothing? And now I own more data than the government of a small country. People worship that. Lauren smiled thinly. People fear that. He laughed. Same thing. Camila moved quietly between tables, pretending not to listen, though her mind recorded everything. She could have corrected his Spanish grammar. She could have told him she spoke 5 languages, including the one he butchered. She could have told him she'd met presidents and scholars, that her father's foundation had funded projects he'd only read about in headlines. But she said none of it. Not yet. By 10 o'clock, the dinner had stretched into arrogance. The restaurant had thinned out, leaving the richest tables to linger. Thomas ordered another bottle of Margaux. For the victory, he declared, and leaned back like a man certain of his place in the universe. When Camila returned with the bottle, she overheard him laughing with Mark again, this time about philanthropy. All this nonsense about charity, Thomas scoffed. People should earn their worth. I built my empire. No one gave me anything. Camila's heart stung at the irony. Her father had once offered Grayson Technologies a grant to build educational AI software. Grayson had refused, saying charity spoiled innovation. She set the bottle down and waited as he finished his rant. Lauren sighed. Thomas, maybe not tonight? He ignored her. You know what's wrong with this country? Too many people think they deserve respect just for existing. Camila's voice came quiet, measured. Everyone deserves respect, sir. It's not a luxury. It's humanity. The table fell silent. Thomas blinked. Excuse me? Camila's eyes met his, calm, steady, unafraid. You said respect must be earned. I disagree. For a moment he looked amused. Then his smirk returned. And what would you know about that, sweetheart? She tilted her head slightly. More than you think. Then she stepped back and left before he could respond. Thomas laughed, but it sounded forced. Mark tried to joke. She's got spirit. Lauren looked at him sharply. She's got dignity. There's a difference. But Thomas waved it off, pretending he wasn't rattled. Whatever. Just a waitress. Camila disappeared into the kitchen, her composure cracking only for a second as she leaned against the wall, exhaling slowly. She had wanted to stay silent, to observe, not interfere. But something about his tone, the way he wore cruelty like cologne, had torn open the dam. Still, she reminded herself, the night wasn't over. Out on the floor, the city's elite kept laughing, unaware that the story they were living was about to shift. Somewhere between humiliation and truth, something had begun to awaken. The city never slept, but it had a way of forgetting people. By the time Camila Rivera left Le Jardin Bleu that night, Manhattan had traded its glamour for garbage trucks and tired footsteps. The rain had started light, persistent, the kind that didn't soak you, just reminded you how small you were in a city built for giants. Camila walked home with her hands in her coat pockets, her apron folded neatly under one arm. She took the long way past Fifth Avenue, where store windows displayed handbags that cost more than a semester's tuition. Each display reflected a truth she'd been learning firsthand. Money buys noise, but not decency. When she reached her small apartment in Queens, the clock read 1:14 a.m. The room was clean but bare. A futon, a desk stacked with books in 3 languages, and a photo of her father framed in wood. In the picture, Alejandro Rivera smiled beneath a banner that read, "Education is freedom." Camila sat by the window and stared out at the city lights. For months, she had balanced 2 worlds. The one her father left behind, built on ideals and wealth, and the one she lived in now, built on tips and exhaustion. She took out her journal, opened to a page filled with neatly written notes, and added a line under the date. "Tonight, I failed my silence." It had been her rule from the beginning. Observe, endure, learn, never interfere. The experiment had started a year earlier. When her father's will was read, his board of trustees expected her to sign off on the transition of the Rivera Foundation, to take the helm, to continue his legacy. Instead, Camila stunned everyone by declining to sign immediately. "I want to see what the world looks like from the bottom," she had told the attorneys. They'd laughed at first, thinking it was a phase, grief, rebellion, perhaps guilt. But she was serious. She had watched her father's life. Charity galas filled with billionaires applauding each other. Social projects funded from a distance. Foundations that looked more like empires. He had meant well, but something about it had always troubled her. How could one help the world without ever touching it? So she disappeared from the media, changed her name slightly, withdrew money from a secondary account, and moved to New York under the radar. No one from the foundation knew where she was, not even the board. At first, she took small jobs, receptionist, translator, tutor. But she wanted to see more, to see how power behaved when it thought it wasn't being watched. That was how she ended up at Le Jardin Bleu. The restaurant was a mirror of the elite world. Polite on the surface, cruel underneath. She'd watched investors mock dishwashers, executives bark at servers, and wives whisper apologies for husbands' arrogance. Every night was a study in human behavior until Thomas Grayson. He was different not because his cruelty was new, but because it was deliberate, calculated, the kind of disdain that came from believing disrespect was a birthright. She replayed his words in her head. "This wine costs more than your car." He'd said it casually, like it was truth, not insult. Her chest tightened. For the first time in months, she felt anger. Not the burning kind, but the cold, quiet sort that seeps into your bones. She closed her journal and whispered into the silence. I wasn't supposed to react. But deep down, she knew it wasn't a failure. It was awakening. The next evening at the restaurant, nothing seemed different. Thomas Grayson was nowhere to be seen. But whispers about the girl who talked back buzzed among the staff. "You shouldn't have said anything," warned Mario, one of the older waiters. "He's a regular. Big money. You don't want to get on his bad side." Camila smiled faintly. "There's no good side to arrogance." Mario shook his head. "Maybe not. But bad sides get people fired." She returned to polishing glasses, pretending she wasn't thinking about it. But the truth was, she didn't care about losing the job. What worried her was how easily people accepted humiliation as part of their survival. At one point, the floor manager, Dana, pulled her aside. "Camila, you've got to be careful. You're good at what you do. But if he complains..." Camila cut her off gently. "Then I'll find another job." Dana sighed. "I wish I had your courage." Camila shook her head. "It's not courage. It's clarity." Later that night, during cleanup, she overheard the kitchen staff talking about a charity gala scheduled for next month, hosted by none other than the Grayson Foundation, the philanthropic arm of Thomas's company. The tickets cost 5,000 a plate, said one of the chefs. Apparently, it's for educational initiatives in Latin America. Camila froze. Latin America, her father's region of work. His foundation's network had once partnered with several tech firms for education projects. Some successful, some corrupt. She wondered how much Thomas really cared about education and how much was just optics. When she returned home that night, she began researching him. His story was well documented. Son of a steelworker, self-made tech mogul, adored by the business press, controversial for his attitude toward ethics. He owned companies across data analytics, logistics, and even philanthropy consulting. But what caught her attention was a headline buried in a trade journal. Grayson Technologies secures contract with Rivera Foundation's digital education program. Her pulse quickened. She hadn't signed those papers, but apparently, the foundation's interim board had continued partnerships under her father's name. Thomas Grayson was, technically, benefiting from her inheritance. It wasn't just arrogance anymore. It was personal. The next morning, Camila met with Clara, an old friend who worked as a legal researcher. They met at a quiet coffee shop in Soho, where the morning rush smelled of espresso and ambition. "You look tired," Clara said, setting down her cup. "What's going on with this undercover experiment of yours?" Camila smiled wearily. "I had a moment. Someone pushed the limits." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. Entitled, Rich Loud?" "Rich, yes. Loud, yes. Entitled doesn't even cover it." Clara leaned in. "You know you can't keep doing this forever, right? The board is looking for you. The media's starting to ask where you went." Camila stirred her coffee slowly. "I'll come back when I understand what my father missed." "And what's that?" "That charity without empathy is just PR." Clara sighed, knowing it was useless to argue. "So what now?" Camila hesitated. "Now, I observe a little longer." But her mind was already racing. If Grayson was using the Rivera Foundation's name for his tech initiatives, he was using her father's legacy as cover for his greed. She needed to see how deep it went, and whether anyone else would notice. That night at Le Jardin Bleu, she found herself facing another test of patience. Thomas Grayson had returned. The moment he walked in, the staff went rigid. His reputation had arrived before he did. He wore the same tailored arrogance as before, accompanied by two new investors, both young, eager to laugh at his jokes. When the hostess tried to assign a different waiter, Thomas interrupted. "No, the brunette from last time. She pours better." Camila heard the words and froze. She could refuse, but doing so would draw attention. So she nodded, tied her apron tighter, and approached the table with quiet grace. Thomas grinned. "Well, look who's back. I was worried I scared you off." "Not easily frightened, sir," she replied evenly. "Good," he said. "I like people with backbone." The table laughed. As the evening dragged on, his comments grew sharper. Little jabs meant to amuse his guests. But Camila stayed calm, deflecting with professionalism that only made him more irritated. Finally, as she refilled his glass, he switched again to Spanish, this time more deliberate. "¿Sabes lo que significa respeto? Easqued, es mirkin." "It means knowing your place." She paused, the wine mid-pour, then met his eyes and answered, flawlessly, fluently, without hesitation. "Sí, señor," she said softly. "Y también significa tratar a los demás como seres humanos." "Yes, sir. And it also means treating others as human beings." The table fell silent. Thomas blinked, surprised by her fluency, and the edge beneath her calm tone. For a second, he said nothing. Then he laughed, uneasy. "Impressive. You've got a mouth on you." Camila straightened. "Only when someone mistakes cruelty for charm." Mark coughed awkwardly. One of the investors muttered, "Damn." The tension hung like smoke. Then Thomas waved his hand dismissively. "You're lucky I'm in a good mood." Camila nodded. "Luck has nothing to do with respect, sir." And with that she walked away. In the kitchen, the chefs and servers buzzed with whispers. "What did you say to him?" Mario asked in disbelief. "The truth," she replied simply. He whistled. Girl, that's not how this world works. Camila smiled faintly. Maybe it's time it does. She didn't see the young man sitting by the bar, quietly filming part of the exchange with his phone. A freelance journalist named Ethan Morales, who often wrote about class and labor issues in New York. That single clip, a waitress answering a billionaire in perfect Spanish, would change everything in the days to come. But that was still ahead. For now, as Camila finished her shift and stepped into the cold night once more, she looked up at the skyline and whispered to herself, silence protects power, but truth protects dignity. She didn't know yet how far her words would travel. But somewhere between the neon lights and the rain, a quiet revolution had begun, led by the woman no one saw coming. The next morning, the city woke up to a storm. Not of weather, but of words. The video had spread overnight. A short, 40-second clip posted by an unknown user with the caption, Waitress schools billionaire in his own language. It showed Camila Rivera standing in her black uniform, her posture calm, her tone steady, her eyes fixed on Thomas Grayson as she said, respect means treating others as human beings. The camera had caught his stunned silence, the awkward laughter from his guests, and the quiet dignity of her walk away. By noon, the clip had been viewed 6 million times. News outlets picked it up within hours. Bloggers dissected it. Social media turned it into a movement. Hashtags appeared. Hashtag respect has no price. Hashtag the waitress. Hashtag human before title. Some called her brave. Others called her reckless. But everyone agreed on one thing. She had said what millions wished they could say.
Hâte le jardin bleu, chaos érupted.
The phone rang non-stop with journalists asking for interviews, and paparazzi swarmed outside hoping to identify the waitress. The manager nearly fainted when he realized how quickly it had spread. Dana, the floor manager, rushed into the staff room, eyes wide. Camila, they're asking for you on every network. CNN, NBC, even Telemundo. Who are you? Camila sat quietly, folding napkins, as if nothing had happened. No one special, she said softly.
Dana stared.
No one special doesn't trend worldwide in 6 hours. Camila smiled faintly. Then maybe the world is finally paying attention to the right kind of people. Across town, in a glass tower that looked down on the city, Thomas Grayson was losing his composure. What the hell is this? He barked, slamming his tablet on the conference table. The video played again and again, each replay slicing his ego thinner. His PR head, Lydia, kept her voice steady. It's gone viral, sir. We're trying to control the narrative. But what? People love her, Lydia said. They're calling her the face of working-class dignity. Some are even tagging your foundation's education projects, asking if you teach respect in your leadership programs. Thomas's jaw clenched. Do damage control. Spin it. Say it's been taken out of context. Lydia hesitated. With all due respect, sir, the context is the problem. He glared. Then find dirt on her. Everyone has a past. I want her name, her address, everything. Lydia opened her laptop. Already on it. By that evening, Camila's phone was buzzing nonstop. Unknown numbers, emails, requests. She ignored them all. When she returned home, she found a crowd of reporters waiting outside her building. Microphones, cameras, flashes. Miss Rivera, are you the waitress from the viral video? Can we get a statement? Did you know who he was when you answered him? Camila slipped inside quietly and locked the door behind her. For a moment, she just stood there, breathing in the silence. Then she opened her laptop. Her inbox was overflowing. Not just from journalists, but from strangers across the world. Messages from single mothers, teachers, students,
Immigrants.
people thanking her for saying what they never could. You reminded me that I'm not invisible. My boss treats me like trash. I cried watching you. You gave us dignity back. Camila's eyes stung. She hadn't meant for any of this to happen. She hadn't wanted attention. She only wanted truth. She closed her eyes and whispered, Maybe this was meant to happen. Meanwhile, in a downtown newsroom, Ethan Morales, the journalist who'd filmed the clip, was staring at his computer. The analytics were exploding, over 20 million views by evening. But what interested him wasn't the fame. It was her. He'd seen something in her eyes that night. Calm, intelligent, deliberate. She wasn't just a waitress. He was sure of it. He began digging. Public records, social media, employment files. Nothing. The name Camila Rivera appeared only on restaurant paperwork. No digital footprint, no college records, no past addresses. Until he found a scholarship archive under the Rivera Foundation. The last entry listed, Camila Rivera, Linguistics, University of Barcelona, full grant, funded by Alejandro Rivera Foundation. Ethan sat back slowly. No way. The pieces clicked. The accent, the poise, the Spanish, the way she carried herself. She wasn't just a scholarship recipient. She was the daughter, the heir to the Rivera Foundation, one of the largest humanitarian trusts in the Western Hemisphere. He picked up his phone and called his editor. I think the waitress is the billionaire's daughter. The next morning, the headline hit the front pages. Viral waitress revealed as hidden heiress to Rivera fortune. The story spread like wildfire. Overnight, Camila went from being the voice of the working class to the mystery woman of wealth and disguise. The media couldn't get enough. They called her the billionaire in disguise. The humble heiress? The hidden Rivera. Talk shows debated her motives. Some accused her of staging the video for publicity. Others called her a genius for exposing elitism from within. And Thomas Grayson? His fury turned to panic. Because buried in the news coverage was a small but explosive revelation. Grayson Technologies, his company, had active contracts with the Rivera Foundation, pending approval by the heiress herself. And now, that heiress had just become the world's moral darling. At the Foundation's headquarters, the interim board called an emergency meeting. The chairman, Dr. Simon Whitmore, looked around the table of uneasy faces. She's alive, she's well, and apparently she's working as a waitress in New York. The press is calling this an act of humility. We call it problematic. An elderly board member frowned. Problematic? It's brilliant. Public trust in the foundation has tripled since the news broke. Whitmore's jaw tightened. It's also dangerous. If she reclaims control, she'll question every contract, including the one with Grayson Technologies. A murmur spread around the table. They all knew how much money was tied up in those digital education projects. Whitmore exhaled slowly. Find her. Bring her back. And for God's sake, make sure she doesn't speak publicly before we do. Camila sat in her apartment, watching the chaos unfold. Her photo was everywhere now, news tickers, magazine covers, trending searches. She had no more anonymity. Clara called her. Camila, it's out. Everyone knows. The board wants to meet with you immediately. Camila's voice was calm. I know. What are you going to do? She looked out the window at the city that had taught her more than any boardroom ever could. Finish what I started. That evening, she agreed to one interview with Ethan Morales. They met in a quiet studio, no makeup, no glamour. Just 2 chairs, 2 cameras, and truth. Ethan began softly. Camila! The world knows your name now. Why hide it for so long? Camila paused before answering. Because I wanted to see how people live when they don't have power. My father believed in giving back. I needed to understand who we were giving to. And what did you learn? That respect is rarer than money, and that those who have the least often have the most to teach. Ethan nodded slowly. And Thomas Grayson? Her eyes darkened slightly. He taught me that some people think power gives them permission to be cruel. But cruelty always exposes weakness. The room went silent. Ethan leaned forward. Do you plan to reclaim your place at the Rivera Foundation? Camila smiled faintly. I never lost it. I just wanted to remember why it existed. The interview aired the next day, and within hours, donations to her foundation skyrocketed. Schools, charities, and nonprofits began quoting her words. Respect is rarer than money. Across the city, Thomas Grayson watched the broadcast from his office. rage simmering behind his eyes. "Turn it off," he ordered. Lydia hesitated. "Sir, maybe you should. Turn off." He slammed the remote on the desk. "She humiliated me. Now she's a saint and I'm the villain. I won't let this destroy me." But what Thomas didn't realize was that the destruction had already begun. Quietly, inevitably. Whistleblowers within his company had started leaking documents showing misuse of charity funds, inflated contracts, and falsified reports tied to the Rivera Foundation projects. And the public, now in love with Camila's honesty, was ready to listen. That night, as Camila sat alone by her window again, she received a message, unsigned, but familiar. "They're coming for you. Stay quiet, or everything your father built will crumble." She looked at the screen for a long time, then typed back one line. "If truth destroys it, it was never real." She closed her laptop and looked out at the skyline, glowing with the restless energy of change. The silence of humiliation was over. Now came the roar of consequence. 3 days after the interview, New York felt different. The morning air buzzed with something new. Not gossip, not scandal, but anticipation. Everyone wanted to know what Camila Rivera would do next. Would she return to her father's foundation? Would she respond to Thomas Grayson's silence? Or would she disappear again, as quietly as she'd first appeared? But Camila had no intention of disappearing. She had spent her entire life under others' expectations. The daughter of Alejandro Rivera, the angel investor who'd poured millions into humanitarian programs before dying in a mysterious plane crash 5 years earlier. After his death, the board took control, temporarily managing the foundation until Camila completed her degree and adjusted emotionally. Translation: they never wanted her back. She was too idealistic, too young, too unwilling to play their corporate games. But now, the girl they'd sidelined was suddenly the most powerful moral voice in the country. That morning, Clara burst into Camila's apartment, her hands full of newspapers. "Look at these," she gasped, spreading the headlines across the table. "The heiress speaks truth. From waitress to warrior. Camila Rivera, the voice America needed." Camila scanned them quietly, her face unreadable. "Public love is fragile," she murmured. "It fades faster than outrage." Clara frowned. "You sound like your father." Camila smiled faintly. "Then maybe I'm finally ready to take his place." Clara hesitated. "You know the board won't just hand it over." "I don't need them to hand it over," Camila said softly. "I'll make them give it back." That afternoon, she requested a meeting with the Rivera Foundation board, not as an employee or advisor, but as the legal heir. The message was short and formal. To the Board of Trustees, it is time we discuss the Foundation's original mission. I will attend the meeting tomorrow at noon. Camila Rivera. When the email hit their inboxes, silence spread through the boardroom like frost. Dr. Simon Whitmore, the interim chairman, slammed his palm on the table. "She's forcing our hand. Can we refuse her?" one member whispered. Whitmore shook his head grimly. "No. Legally, she's the majority owner. But we can control the narrative. If she tries to expose us, we'll paint her as unstable, emotional. Say she's overwhelmed by media pressure." He looked at his assistant. "Schedule the meeting, and make sure Thomas Grayson joins us remotely. He's too deep in our projects to sit this one out." The next day, the boardroom of the Rivera Foundation was filled with tension so thick it hummed in the air. The walls gleamed with framed awards, glossy photos of humanitarian missions, a gallery of good intentions masking quiet corruption. Camila entered wearing a cream suit, her hair tied back, eyes calm. The cameras outside had followed her every step, but inside, she was all composure. "Señorita Rivera." Whitmore greeted her smoothly, extending a hand. "It's been a long time." Camila ignored the handshake. "Let's not pretend this is a reunion. It's an audit." Whitmore's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, we're all on the same side." "Camila Saturday, are we?" A few nervous glances darted around the table. Whitmore cleared his throat. "Perhaps before we begin, Mr. Grayson would like to join. The giant screen behind them flickered to life. Thomas Grayson's face appeared, pale and tight. The background of his office looked immaculate, but the man himself seemed frayed. "Miss Rivera," he began smoothly, "quite the performance you've put on. I have to admit, I didn't see that coming." "It wasn't a performance," she said evenly. "Just honesty. Something you seem unfamiliar with." Thomas chuckled. "Still playing the saint, I see. Tell me, was it satisfying, humiliating me in front of millions?" "No," Camila said quietly. "Humiliation was your choice. Dignity was mine." A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Whitmore raised a hand. "Enough of this. We're here to discuss governance, not personal grievances." Camila leaned forward. "Governance is personal when it betrays its mission. My father's foundation was meant to serve education, not fund your private partnerships." Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "You don't understand how business works, Miss Rivera." "Maybe not your kind of business," she replied, "but I understand integrity." She pulled a small folder from her briefcase and slid it across the table. Inside were pages of documents, financial transfers, false invoices, and cross-contracts between Grayson Technologies and Whitmore's consulting firms. "I found these," she said calmly, "in the Foundation's open records. Millions redirected under digital learning initiatives. Care to explain why half of it ended up in offshore accounts connected to your names?" Gasps rippled around the room. Whitmore's face drained of color. "You have no proof these are real."
Camila interrupted. "Ido."
"And so do the journalists who'll receive them at exactly noon, unless you agree to step down and release the full audit publicly." Thomas's image froze on the screen for a moment. Then his voice came through, low and dangerous. "You're making a mistake, Camila. You're ruining your father's legacy." She met his gaze without blinking. "I'm saving it." At that exact moment, Ethan Morales and his news team were stationed across the street, waiting. Camila had trusted him with the story, but not all of it. He didn't know she'd scheduled automatic transmissions of every document she'd uncovered. The world would see the truth whether or not she walked out of that building. Inside, the tension cracked. Whitmore whispered to Thomas through the speaker, "Cut the feed. We can't let her." Too late. The screen behind them suddenly shifted, not to Thomas's face, but to a live broadcast from Global News Network. The anchor's voice filled the boardroom. "Breaking news. Leaked documents suggest major financial fraud within the Rivera Foundation's technology programs. Sources indicate collaboration between Foundation board members and Grayson Technologies, involving the misappropriation of education funds." The color drained from every face in the room. Camila sat back, silent, composed. Whitmore slammed his fist on the table. You set us up." "No," she said softly. "You set yourselves up. I just turned on the lights." By evening, the scandal had exploded. Every major outlet was running the story. The Foundation's board resigned one by one under pressure from public outrage. Prosecutors announced a formal investigation into Grayson Technologies. Camila's face appeared on every screen, not as a scandal, but as the woman who exposed corruption hidden behind philanthropy. That night, the Rivera Foundation issued a statement. Effective immediately, Ms. Camila Rivera assumes the position of chairwoman and CEO of the Rivera Foundation. A full public audit will be conducted to ensure transparency and rebuild trust. Donations poured in. Volunteers lined up. The world believed again. But Thomas Grayson wasn't finished. 2 days later, his legal team filed a defamation suit, claiming emotional distress and intentional sabotage. In interviews, he painted himself as a victim of class warfare. The public didn't buy it. Comments flooded his social media. "Respect costs nothing. She told you the truth, and you called it arrogance. Money can't fix shame." His company's stock plummeted. Partners withdrew. Even Lydia, his PR director, quit and went on record saying, "He built an empire on intimidation." Camila just reminded him it's fragile. That evening, Thomas sat alone in his penthouse, staring at the skyline he'd once ruled. His reflection looked like a stranger, older, smaller, defeated. He played the video again, the one that had started it all. Her calm voice filled the room. Respect means treating others as human beings. He paused the clip. For the first time, he realized. She hadn't shouted, hadn't cursed, hadn't threatened. She'd simply told the truth. And that truth had undone everything he built on lies. He buried his face in his hands. Meanwhile, at the foundation, Camila stood before her father's portrait in the lobby. The evening light bathed the room in gold. Clara entered quietly behind her. "It's over, Cammy. You won." Camila smiled faintly. "No one wins when dignity is the prize. We just learn who's willing to fight for it." Clara hesitated. "What now?" Camila turned toward the windows, the city alive below. "Now we rebuild, but differently. Scholarships without red tape. Programs that actually reach people. And maybe a reminder that humility isn't weakness. It's strength." A week later, she was invited to speak at Columbia University. A lecture titled, "The Language of Respect." The auditorium was full. Cameras lined the back. Camila stood on stage, her voice steady. "When I wore that uniform, people saw a waitress. They didn't see education or intellect or worth. But dignity doesn't depend on what you wear. It depends on what you believe about yourself. Some people speak in money, some in power. But the language that truly changes the world is respect, because everyone understands it." Applause thundered through the hall. Students rose to their feet. Tears glimmered in the corners of more than a few eyes. Afterward, as she left the building, Ethan caught up with her. "You did it," he said softly. "You changed everything." Camila smiled. "No, Ethan. The truth did. I just refused to stay quiet." He hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever think about him?" "Grayson." She looked away, toward the city lights. "Sometimes, but not with hate. Pity, maybe, because he thought power could silence people like me. And now he knows. The quiet ones always speak the loudest when they finally do." That night, alone on her balcony, Camila watched the city breathe. She thought of her father, of the waitress's apron still folded in her drawer, of the night that changed everything. The world had seen her as a victim, then a heroine, then a symbol. But she knew the truth was simpler. She was just a woman who refused to bow to cruelty, and somehow that had become revolutionary. She whispered to the wind, "Papa, I finally found my voice." And somewhere beyond the city's hum, she could almost hear his reply, "You always had it, Hija. You just needed the world to listen." 3 months later, New York had traded its summer heat for a cool amber glow. The scandal that once consumed the media had quieted. The Rivera Foundation had been reborn, transparent, trusted, and alive again under Camila's leadership. The woman who had once carried trays of coffee now carried the hopes of a generation who'd been silenced too long. Camila sat alone in her father's study. Not the glossy executive suite upstairs, but the humble cedar-walled office he'd once used. A thin beam of morning sunlight streamed across his old quote that hung above the desk. "True leadership is service, not status." She traced her fingers along the frame, whispering, "I understand now, Papa." For the first time in years, her heart was quiet. The noise of revenge, the ache of humiliation, the burn of anger, all of it had faded into something softer. Peace. Clara stepped in, holding a tablet. "You're on in 10 minutes. The governor's waiting," she said with a proud grin. "You ready to make history again?" Camila smiled faintly. "You ever get used to people listening to you?" Clara laughed. "Not when they used to ignore you." Camila straightened her suit, glanced once more at her father's portrait, and whispered, "Wish me courage." The City Hall auditorium was a sea of faces. Journalists, officials, students, dreamers. The launch of the National Program for Ethical Leadership was a national event, a direct result of her story. When she stepped on stage, the applause was thunderous, yet she remained calm, almost still, as if she carried something greater than applause, truth. "When I first came to this city," she began, her voice smooth and clear, I believed respect had to be earned. But I've learned that it must be given freely, especially to those the world overlooks. I was a waitress once. People saw me, but they didn't really see me. They saw a uniform, a role, not a person. But silence doesn't mean weakness. It's the waiting ground of power. If you ever find yourself underestimated, remember, your worth doesn't shrink because someone refuses to see it. Truth always outlives arrogance. The hall erupted. The applause wasn't just noise. It was gratitude, collective and sincere. Cameras flashed, people cheered, and for a moment, Camila felt her father's presence somewhere in the light above her. 2 mornings later, an envelope appeared on her desk. The handwriting was tight and deliberate. Camila, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but please, one conversation. Face to face. Thomas. She stared at it for a long time. Clara, ever protective, frowned when she saw it. Don't tell me you're going to meet him. I am, Camila said simply. Not for him. For closure. That afternoon, she went alone to a quiet cafe in Brooklyn. The man who once ruled boardrooms and dictated headlines sat by the window, wearing a wrinkled jacket and no ring. His face had lost its arrogance. When he saw her, he stood awkwardly. You look well, he murmured. I am, she said, sitting down. He gave a short, humorless laugh. You probably expected me to be angry. Truth is, I'm tired. I lost everything, the company, the money, the friends who weren't really friends. But the worst part was realizing people look at me now the way I used to look at others. Like I'm beneath them. I guess that's justice. Camila studied him quietly, compassion softening her features. Justice isn't punishment. It's clarity. You finally see yourself for who you were. Thomas's gaze dropped. You don't owe me forgiveness. I know, she said softly. But forgiveness isn't a favor. It's freedom. Mine, not yours. His eyes lifted, puzzled. So, you forgive me? Camila nodded. Not because you deserve it. Because I deserve peace. He sat back, stunned by the calm in her voice. There was no bitterness, no triumph, just grace. You sound like your father, he said quietly. I hope so, she replied. He believed people could change, but he also believed in accountability. Don't waste your second chance, Thomas. As she stood to leave, his voice cracked. You really were extraordinary. I just didn't know how to handle someone I couldn't control. She paused by the door, turned slightly, and smiled. That's because power isn't control. It's respect. Then she walked out, leaving him alone in a silence he'd spent his whole life avoiding. Days passed, and with each sunrise, the city felt lighter. The Rivera Foundation thrived. Camila established scholarship programs for underprivileged youth, mentorships for single mothers, and a transparent online portal showing every dollar spent. She transformed philanthropy into something raw and real. Everywhere she went, people called her the voice of dignity. Yet she didn't chase fame. She simply lived by one rule: that every person, regardless of title or past, deserved to be seen. One afternoon, a small brown parcel arrived at her office without a return address. Inside was a silver pen and a handwritten note. For the signatures that will change the world. Thank you for teaching me what power really means. TG. Camila smiled faintly, placed the pen in her drawer, and whispered, So you did learn, after all. Later that evening, she stood on the balcony of her apartment, the city lights flickering below like constellations of hope. She thought of her father, of Clara, of Thomas, of the girl who once waited tables with quiet dignity and unspoken strength. The world saw her now, but she didn't need their applause. Her validation came from within, from every voice she'd helped amplify, from every heart she'd reminded of its worth. As the wind carried the hum of the city, she lifted her face to the sky and whispered, Papa, I finally found my voice. And though the city roared far below, she felt a stillness deep inside. As if, somewhere beyond the noise, her father's voice answered softly. You always had it, Hija. You just needed the world to listen. The lights of New York shimmered, wrapping her in gold, and Camila Rivera, The waitress who once knew too much finally knew peace.